Hello everyone, welcome to another discussion of The White Luck Warrior by R. Scott Baker. This is the second book in the Aspect Emperor series and the fifth book of the second Apocalypse series. We have been reading this approximately 100 pages every week. Today's discussion is going to be chapters 10 and 11. For next week, we're going to be talking chapters 13 and 14. So we'll finish the book in about 2 weeks from now. With me, I have a subset of the usual group of friends. Steve, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Steve, and this is my second time reading this series, and we're right on the cusp of lots of stuff, so it's exciting.
And I am Carl, first time reader of the series, and again, another great couple chapters. Very much enjoying where we are.
Yeah. Steve asked some interesting questions last time, which got answered in the 2 chapters we read today. But I think that's the second chapter, so we'll get there when we get there. But Sorweel, I have grown so fond of him. I really like this chapter so much. A lot of his thoughts, I feel like Baker really amped up how beautifully he wrote in this chapter for some reason. And yeah, I underlined pretty much everything.
Yeah, I mean, it was really great. I thought it was interesting that Sorweel has like a crush on Serwa now. I was like, that sort of caught me off guard, and I thought, oh, that's potentially there's room for drama there. I mean, obviously he's conflicted about it, and he can't sort of help but feel attracted to her. And I guess the big question for me with that is she intentionally kind of playing him in the same way that Kellhus played Esmenet? You know, she doesn't have that Dunyain training, but like, is, you know, she still knowingly seducing him, or is this just a simple matter of, you know, he is, you know, in a camp surrounded by a lot of men, and he sees a beautiful woman who saved his life, and he's like, oh, forbidden fruit.
Didn't he already kind of sort of have a bit of a crush on her before the saving thing happened?
I don't recall it, but I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if he's commented how attractive she is or something like that.
Yeah, I don't think we dwelt on it. I'm trying to remember where else they interacted. It was once when he was in Cayute Assistant and she did not pay him any heed, even mocked him, I think. I'm trying to remember if there were any other occurrences, but all of those times I seem to recall him noting how beautiful she was. So it tracks that when she saved him. It's like, cool, yeah, that's interesting now. But yeah, to your question about, to your point about whether she knows what she's doing and she's actively manipulating him, I feel like there is an answer in the conversation between Kellhus and Proyas, which he says that's the only way for him to be, because he can never have a conversation without actively manipulating it, which I thought was interesting. I wanted to bring that up for discussion. Do you think someone who can, essentially it seems like you're, sorry, accidentally muted my mic. I thought of how you describe how Kellhus maybe has access to a fourth dimension of sorts. And I think not exactly, but it's sort of confirmed in this, at least like he can see at a higher level than others can. So if he can see all the thoughts, it's like the consciousness is the fourth dimension for him even. So is that, but he says, so the question I have is that the only way for me to be is to have a conversation is by actively directing and manipulating it. And like, do you guys buy that? It's almost like he says he can't help it, which I'm like, yeah, maybe you can.
Well, what's interesting about that to me is that it sort of implies that he is still in some way beholden to something, whether it's the darkness that comes before or something else, that he cannot help but act in the way he is acting, much like he accuses everyone around him. And I suppose that, obviously there's a difference in that he is a more adept manipulator, but if it is true, which I don't know, that whole conversation with Proyas was, to me, the most interesting scene in these couple chapters. One, because it's my boy Proyas, and I love any time we get to spend with him. But second, I can't tell if Kellhus is being honest or not. Like, am I falling for his bullshit this time because he's being kept at a distance? Like, I don't trust in anything he says, but a part of me wonders, like, there's a big time skip between, the thousandfold thought and the judging eye. Like, has he in some way changed at all in that time period? Or, did his venturing into the outside, which I do believe he did that impact him at all? Where he, like, why is he talking to Proyas this way?
Yes.
I guess that's the reason why I'm like wondering if he's being sincere on some level. Like, he says he is manipulating Proyas, and I believe, on some level that he does instinctively do it. So in that way, I feel like he is being honest. He says he uses truth, right, to manipulate people, and so I think that's kind of what's going on there. But, like, why is he bringing this up now? Unless, I doubt, I it's not that I think he's doing it out of some sense of, like, guilt, but, like, does he feel like just what's his purpose here, and is there something actually, I guess that's it. What's the end game? What's the purpose? Is there something sincere in what he's doing here? Even as he says, he is actively insincere at all times. And yeah, I just found that really interesting.
So I think, to be clear, I don't think. Okay, I'm unsure about whether or not Kellhus is manipulating Proyas about the fact that that's the only way for him to be in a conversation. But I think on a higher level, just about the Dunyain, I'm like, is it that they can't help themselves? And I think you addressed that to a certain extent, Carl, that if he is bound to behave in that manner, then maybe he's also similarly, like, not quite the darkness that humans are, but something else that binds him to behave a certain way. But let's say he at least believes that. Let's say that's true. But the tone of that conversation to me was very strange overall, because it felt like, sometimes people at the end of their lives, or big kings or something, like, who talk to their favorite person and ask, did you like me because I was a king, or because you really were my friend, and something, like that kind of conversation is what it felt like. Almost like he's looking forward to to an ending of some sort, and so he's feeling free to tell all his truths, if that makes sense.
Right, exactly. No, exactly. I think what you're touching on there is what I was feeling as well. I'm I don't know if it's just because we know there is a divine assassination plot working against him. I don't know if, it had that somber tone of, like, a man who believes he's about to die, kind of just, like, bearing his heart, or if not bearing his heart, just, like, confessing to his sins, It really is
exactly.
kind of like that Catholic sense of confession, it feels like. And that's what's so bizarre. That's what totally put me off, and what I found so compelling and so enigmatic was that I was like, why? This is so tonally different. Like, what is going on here? And, like, I'm reminded, I'm reading a biography on Napoleon right now, and he, in his last days in exile, essentially, like, recounted his life, and, it was all, like, it was still propagandized, and anyway, that's a whole separate can of worms. But it kind of reminded me of that exactly when you're talking about it, Varsha. It's like this feels like a guy who's like knows he's about to die and is confessing his sins. It's just bizarre. It's not what I expect of Kellhus.
It was a completely baffling tone. I had no idea what to make of it. And it's multiple of these conversations too. I feel like I'm more baffled at this point than Proyas is. There's no idea. I'm really curious to see where that goes. What do you make of it, Steve?
It's probably my least favorite part of this book.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Do you want to... Can you tell us why without spoilers?
No.
Okay.
No, not why. No, I'm not too crazy about it.
So did you not like it as you were reading it, or do you not like it in retrospect, knowing how it's going to end?
I wasn't crazy about it the first time, and I like it even less now. I still think it's interesting. I don't hate it, but it's just I kind of feel like this book is meandering a little bit too much. Like we're not moving along, and I feel like those sections are kind of meander a little bit too much sometimes.
Interesting. And do you feel that way about the Sorweel parts of the chapter too, or just the Kellhus-Proyas conversations?
Well, more so the Kellhus and Proyas conversations. Now that you put it that, so I do like those conversations a lot more than Sorweel. Sorweel is probably my least favorite part of the second half.
Oh no,
That's cold.
The Proyas and the Kellhus stuff. Just wait.
And Steve says, just wait.
I know, the ominous tone. I mean, talking about, kind of somber, like on death's door. Or go ahead, Steve.
No, just the whole, kind of, you're all like children to me. He's not very covert about kind of where he is now. I feel like in the first half, in the first trilogy, he wasn't as overt about it, but I feel like he's been a lot more. Oh, he's very clear about the way he sees everyone now.
And that's what's interesting to me, because exactly he has been so covert, and maybe, maybe what we'll find is there's no payoff, there's no sort of uncovering, but it caught me off guard exactly because he is being so blunt, and you're like, why is he sharing all of this now? Why is he being so honest? Because he is. I mean, he's being, like, there's nothing he's saying that's a lie. He is literally using the truth. And the question, right, is to what end? What is motivating him? Steve, I agree that there have been sections I felt like have meandered. For me, it's not even like necessarily specific, like extended sections of the book so much as it is, I feel like some of the passages, some of the paragraphs, it can be a bit repetitive. It feels like it could have used a little more editing to like maybe tighten it a bit. Like we're repeating some ideas, some similar scenes, similar drama. I mean, again, like I think on a like chapter by chapter level, and like ultimately what each character does in each chapter, I still find is ultimately compelling me, and I'm enjoying everything I'm reading. But there definitely are some scenes or some passages that I'm like, as beautifully written as they are, I'm like, I feel like we just had this exact same passage earlier, or you took a paragraph to write what you could have written in like a sentence, but all that said, I am greatly enjoying this, and God, I love Sorweel, so just gonna have to agree to disagree on that one. He's my other boy, my sweet boy, who I'm sure is going to commit a war crime or do something terrible. I'm still waiting for that shoe to drop. He was like a little rough with Disrong, but they're like actually rape monsters, so I can kind of forgive it. I'm waiting for him to I don't know.
I think part of why I have less patience for like sort of the Sorweel sections, especially because I love Esmenet and her storyline, so I just want to get back to her. And the Sorweel stuff, I feel, goes on too long.
Interesting. I also like Esmenet a lot, but I think that is the line that's dragging me down in this book. I prefer staying with Akamian and Sorweel as compared to getting to Esmenet. Yeah, interesting. Interesting preferences all around. But I think we started the Kellhus Proyas thread because we were talking about Serwa and whether she's actively manipulating Sorweel. I mean, my no-brainer guess is yes, but we'll see. We'll see where that goes.
How old is Sorweel? Do we know? I feel like I maybe have asked this question before, but I don't remember. Is he like... He's got to be like 16, right? Like, for some reason I started the series thinking he was like 13, but he's got to be like later adolescence.
I think he's like 15 or 16,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah, 15, 16. That's the impression I have. Which is interesting because like during his long musings, I forget that. I think of him as, I don't know, early 20s, late 20s even. I have to keep reminding myself that he's so young.
Well, I feel so weird about how he's written on some level because I feel like he has these incredibly... He has some ponderings, specifically like kind of his philosophical ponderings that to me feel very mature. Or at least like more mature than like a 15-year-old would probably be thinking. Particularly a 15-year-old from a relatively... I mean, there's always exceptions with different cultures, but, you know, he came from this, like, warrior kind of literally on the frontier, on the edge of the world, fighting the Srank all the time. Like, I guess his father clearly did have a philosophical side to him. But then he has times where he just feels, like, still very childlike to me. Like, I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's just my own sort of projecting my preconceived notions onto him, but there are times, again, where I feel like I'm reading, like, a 13-year-old's POV, and then he has these, like, incredibly deep thought-out, you know, ideas. I guess maybe it's even just the way he grieves and the way he thinks of his father. I don't know if... I think that's what it is, actually. I think it's his personal relationships, to me, feel very immature. And, like, I don't know, maybe this is just my own projection, like projecting my own life too, but I feel like by the time I was like 15, 16, I had developed a more nuanced view of my parents and like the world around me than, and I definitely lived in like a relatively sheltered upbringing. Like I wasn't fighting Srank on the edge of the world, you know, and encountering this god emperor who like, you know, nope. I didn't have these traumatic experiences. But, you know, everyone's different, and again, I may just be projecting my own life onto him a bit. But yeah, he has this weird dichotomy that I don't know, I find interesting.
Yeah, I think I have let myself forget that he is 15, 16. These do read like the thoughts of a much older person. But I am wondering, as you were talking, I did wonder if what we're seeing is sort of the author condensing like free floating thoughts in his head, you know, and making more of them than they might have been, just floating random impressions that a 15-year-old might have and condensing them into a lot more mature seeming thoughts. Or if this is actively Sorweel thinking. I think it's the latter, but I'm wondering if there's possibility for the former. But yeah, with that said, I do love the way the chapter opens. The shadows of missing things are always cold, and for Viral Sorweel, so very much was missing. And he goes on to say, laughter and hope were missing. I love that. There was so many wonderful moments in this chapter. Okay, not wonderful, like nice moments that I really liked. But we'll talk about the Yatwer thing, but before that, real quick, I wanted to mention why else I thought this was a brilliant chapter was when Soranga says that he's going to add Harweel to his list of ancestors because he and Sorweel now are brothers from different countries. I thought that whole sequence with Obotwiga, is that his name? And how they were there for each other through all of that. I think, yeah, that was absolutely brilliant. I loved it.
Yeah, it was very moving. I'm just, yeah, a really tragic chapter, you know, and with Prosperian's death too, and we start out the epigraph, the first epigraph, you know, about there's morality and there's cowardice. The two are not to be confused, even though in appearance and effect they are so often the same. I started out reading that and I was like, oh my god, like this is the sort of thing that like is so easy to, you know, depending on how you read this, like it's so easy to criticize and be like, oh, here it goes being like edgelord, grimdark, you know, like this is the sort of thing that I think the series is sometimes accused of. And then we go on into the chapter, and it should be stated that, right, this is from a particular book, and the whatever the Inrithi version, the Chronicles of the Tusk, I think is their version of the Tusk. But so, you know, it has its own context, right? It's not meant to be taken at like face value necessarily, but it's just such like a to me like a needlessly bleak and myopic and uncomplicated, like overly simplistic view of the world that I was initially put off. But then they, of course, to Baker's credit, he introduces, you know, a moral conundrum with like killing the slaves and all of that is you can see the sort of the tension there, right? And why someone would argue that like trying to be needlessly moral to spare someone isn't actually, you know, it's cowardice because you're just leaving them to die a slower death on the plains to get like raped and killed by the Stronk or something, you know. And so in that level, I felt it was interesting. That was just something I wanted to bring up because I definitely, I was really put off. I was like, oh my god, are we really doing this? You know, for a series that I feel like has, with as cynical as it is, has explored a lot of nuance. And but I Baker surprised me again in terms of like showing a position where I think it's still too broad a statement to be like, you know, there's that much overlap between the notions of morality and cowardice, but he presented a situation where you can very easily see, you know, the argument being made that, you know, in trying to be moral, you're being a coward, and perhaps not even being moral at all.
I didn't think of that connection between the epigraph and what happens in the chapter. I think, yeah, I really like it. That's a great point. Yeah, I thought the connection was more to the beginning where Soranga ran away, but that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So I like your explanation. But yeah, when Obotviga shows up and Soranga's almost unhappy that he did because he's going to have to kill himself now. Yeah, that was also pretty moving, and I guess we didn't see Soranga in a very good light throughout this chapter, but he still won himself over to me really well, especially the bits about being in the longest shadow, and now he needs to how he's kind of suffering now for the fact that he ran away and didn't go save Kellhus like Sorweel did. I think having to deal with that now. I don't know, I almost wish we got a Soranga perspective, but I like as much of him as we are getting, I hope.
He's a character that I am sympathetic to. I certainly what he did was cowardly, but I also, like, I can understand why he would be afraid and run away in the situation. Like, it was, if anything, it's just, like, shows unbelievable courage on Sorweel's part to act as he did. I mean, that's, like, truly legendary heroism. And, you know, Zorunga essentially says as much. I quite like their relationship, and am certainly afraid of where it's going to go.
Yeah, exactly. Anytime a nice relationship happens, this is probably not going to end well. But even Sorwheel has a moment of doubt, doesn't he? Given all he knows and is told about how the goddess is positioning him, he needs to become important in all the ways that he's currently important. So he has a moment where he wonders whether it was his own courage that led him to save Aeschylus. And then he decides, even if the gods helped him, that's fine, because all the heroes who have stories written about them have the gods helping them. And I really liked that little clarification, because those stories, those mythological stories, are interesting because the gods help their chosen ones. They choose them for a reason, but it's because they have potential. So I guess the fact that maybe the courage wasn't his, that there was an external force moving him towards that, is not necessarily a bad thing. You could also look at it cynically and say, it's not really him. That either interpretation works, but I kind of like that he chose the one that lets him continue being happy about it.
Yeah, I think it's a healthy way to view the world, and I'm not convinced that he was influenced there, because I don't know why, Yatwer, for instance, would have pushed for him to act the way he did in the battle. I other than obviously raising his estimation in the army, I guess that you can make that argument, but to me that just felt like Sorweel acting on his own. And as you said, so often, in these heroic stories, when the gods pick their favorites, it's because of who the heroes are and the things they do. And on top of that, kind of where they're placed in the giant, chess game of life, that, this child is like the child, or this hero is like the child of this rival god, so I'm going to take him under my wing and like blah, 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 or like anything like that, right? Like they're politically important in some way, which Sorweel clearly is. I think basically what I'm getting at is I don't think everything he's doing is strictly because of the gods. I think even the gods to act, as Kellhus kind of alluded to, kind of act based on a number of factors out of their control. That in a sense they are not necessarily acting of their complete free will, but in some ways are still responsible for that. I don't know. I guess I have complicated feelings about it, although certainly I feel like this series is positing that no one has free will, at least in this particular universe.
Yeah. And the Dunyain were a bit of a wild card, but what you said earlier is making me wonder if the Kellhus Proyas conversations are meant to tell us that even the Dunyain don't have free will. We'll see where that goes.
I think the Dunyain logic is flawed, and I think Baker's aware of it. To me, they kind of talk themselves into a circle. The most powerful part of their argument is how good they are at manipulating other people, but ordinary people do that too. Like it's not like they're necessarily truly beyond. Clearly they're a level. They're almost like elves in Lord of the Rings, in that, physically they're superior, they're, more intelligent than humans, that sort of thing. They're better at manipulating people. Kellhus is obviously an extreme example of that. But I still feel like they are influenced by similar factors, in that, whether we want to talk about it as the darkness that comes before, or, their own, cultural upbringing, their philosophy, they believe these things, right? They still have their own beliefs, and their beliefs inform how they function. And, I'm sure their genetics play a role. Clearly their genetics play a role, because Kellhus, we've seen it with his kids, right? It's been proven that it's not just he was raised this way. his genetics in some way actively manifest into these disturbed human beings, and who struggle to relate to other humans. And so you imagine, okay, so you can at least accept that like a part of Kellhus, therefore a part of his, what we have often kind of maybe derogatorily referred to as like sociopathy, it's just part of him. Like he just like cannot relate to people and struggle, and so that naturally informs how callous he is, right? And how comfortable he feels manipulating people. And so in that way, he's not a free moving soul, even if he is, capable of moving others' souls, I guess you could say. Which is to say nothing of the gods in it all, right? And how they can influence people's behavior. And I continue to wonder if Kellhus is... I mean, he has to be, right? We thought he has a connection to no god. I don't know if he has a connection with one of the other gods or not, but... yeah, I don't know. I have no theories there.
There was also a distinction made between minds and souls, I think. I forget where that happened, but there was something to the effect that the gods own your souls. Was it in the context of Yatwer that she owns your soul? So yeah, that's the other thing that I wondered about as I read these chapters, is what distinction is the series making between the soul and the mind, and going all the way back to, I think, the second or third book in The Prince of Nothing, when Meandering went and killed a schoolman of some school, because it was a consult, and claimed that it had a soul, that's why it could do sorcery, and it was an anomaly. So yeah, I am starting to wonder what the role of the soul is in this world. I'm gonna need to step out. I'll be right back one sec.
Well, I guess while we're waiting for Varsh to come back, do you have any other general thoughts about this chapter, Steve? And I guess you talked about how you feel it's meandering. What is it that you feel you are not connecting with as much in this part of the slog? What makes it feel like a slog?
There's lots of traveling, lots of talking.
Yeah.
Lots of slogs. I think part of it, I think Baker wants you to feel the distance and the journey, and the massive amount of people traveling, and kind of build that anticipation. But there's a point where it's like, okay, I understand. Like again,
yeah, I hear that.
Yeah. But I think he wants you to feel that journey, kind of like we did in the first trilogy, like in the Warrior Prophet specifically. But there's a point where it's, we know it's a slog, but there's a lot of slogs going on at once.
Yeah. That's definitely a good point, right? That like we're on all these journeys, with the exception of Esmenet, who, and everything going on in Moment. It's definitely a lot of walking, just a lot of walking, and not a lot of... I mean, I actually feel like a Camian. They continue to come to new places and discover new things and encounter new threats. And, you could say like that aspect of the plot is developed more. Certainly there's more change going on. While I feel like the only really change going on... I mean, obviously last chapter we had with Sorwheel and everyone with the big battle, that was significant. But it is a lot of just kind of like, the political dynamics... Considering how much page time we've spent on this, a lot hasn't really happened, right? Yeah. I mean, I think about how we spent... I think that was something I complained about to Judging Eye, that like felt like the ending just was kind of anticlimactic for Sorwheel's story, and that like felt like we hadn't really even gotten started. And so, yeah, I can understand that. I do feel like, I think we're seeing Sorwheel change, and we're seeing some interesting sort of character development, but it's not necessarily fleshed out with, the actual like kind of narrative going into increasingly new places.
Yeah, I think one of the parts that stood out to me in this one, I'm a sucker for the kind of like the Lovecraftian things are happening all the same time kind of thing, and it happens just enough to make it interesting. But I did like that things that are happening at one time.
What did? It's so hard to ask questions and like to pry your thoughts from this. Knowing that we don't want to spoil anything. But what do you make of the scene with Prosperian suicide and the clearly like divine magic going on there, and Yatwer coming and giving a tear? Obviously, you know what the tear ultimately does, what the end game is there. But I guess I'm just more curious about like your thoughts on Prosperian as a character and Yatwer too in general.
How can I say this? The first, I think it's kind of building up Sorweel and playing with the idea of him having a purpose, like he's destined for something, he's chosen for something, he's meant to do something. But the Yatwer stuff, I didn't find too interesting.
Oh, yeah?
I know that I like that there's a different faction, that there's another kind of the side to the coin, but I never really felt, I don't know, I'm choosing words carefully. I think a lot of that was just giving the impression that Kellhus there's somebody who is able to challenge him because he does feel so powerful. I think the first time reading it, there was a concern that I had of power creep. Like Kellhus is becoming too powerful. Like he's becoming Superman. Right. Like no one can touch him. So I think you need to have a threat to Kellhus or a threat to Esmenet that can challenge Kellhus in some way. So I think you need an opposing force to not make it feel like Kellhus is unstoppable. Like we need something that he has to at least plan for, or at least, I won't say worry about, but at least to consider when he's making decisions.
That was something I really enjoyed jumping into this series, was because I had a similar thought. I'm like, what is the console going to do? I guess there's a lot of Strong out there, but I was like, I feel like Kellhus, obviously we're dealing with the logistics too of just the great ordeal and keeping all the soldiers alive, but Kellhus as an individual hadn't felt particularly challenged until the gods were introduced. I think that the closest we really saw him to being challenged was at the end of the Warrior Prophet, where he almost died, although even then we kind of had the sense that was all part of his plan, and now we're like dealing with forces that are literally beyond him and actively want him dead. And I find that very interesting. And another part I really like is the types of magic we've seen.
Yeah.
Like it all feels very different than everything we've been introduced to with the schools. I love it. We're really getting into kind of the horror elements again, and I really enjoyed that. The the face mask to help on like the dead skull it was like a skull made out of like the dirt and then the face put on top of it, and I just love how freaky that is, and all of the kind of divine Yatwerian magic I just found horrifying and awe-inspiring. And did that have any like impact on you? Did you find that at all interesting? Or was that just kind of like, it's, whatever, it's some creepy dead bodies talking?
No, yeah, the horror definitely creeps up as we go through the second series. But I think the magic and the schools in the first trilogy feel very structured. It feels very defined. There are certain schools, there are certain factions. In the second half, I think there's more schools. Like we have the witches, we have more. I think you could probably maybe see more powerful magic. Even the magic in the first trilogy is powerful, but I think it speaks to the world now that Kellhus has how it's changed with Kellhus having so much influence. That it's not as structured. There's more. It's still structured because it's with the schools. There's different schools now with the witches and things like that. But it feels like there's different types of power and there's different types of factions and different types of schools.
It's more of an X factor. Mm-hmm. I mean, the world like naturally expanded as we've gone along, but it definitely feels like, to kind of speak to what you were talking about, that I mean, from a dramatic perspective, you think, okay, yeah, Baker has to come up with something to challenge Kellhus. Like that makes sense. But it's interesting, the world, that there is this cause and effect, in that it is like, these old powers are awakening, and that there is this like direct kind of just like natural and supernatural response to Kellhus and to everything that happened, that like, it's sort of like the idea of like, I think in like Batman comics, that like Batman's presence leads to like all of his supervillains, becoming realized, that like ordinary criminals just wouldn't cut it anymore. And so they all had to become like larger than life, beings. And so, suddenly Kellhus enters the equation, and it's like, okay, well, then naturally, nature sort of rights the balance by reintroducing the gods into the fore, and having, their magic become more powerful and more present. And it's cool. It's very cool, I think. Varsha, we were just talking about the Porsperian scene and Yatwer and the magic and everything.
Nice. Yeah, sorry, I had to step out, but I was listening in. I just couldn't participate. But yeah, I that scene was very interesting. And can you help me understand what happened with the Korai and Sorweel Serwa interaction? Did she not detect the Korai? Because they can sense that, right, as a void, the sorceress. So is that what Sorweel was congratulating himself on? That he wore it right in front of her, and she didn't seem to notice it? Or
she asked about it.
But she asked about the pouch.
Which is what had the Korai in it.
Right. So based on how self-congratulatory Sorweel was at the end of that, I concluded that her question was limited to the design, to the patterns on the pouch, and not what was inside.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
That's why I thought that. But because, well, I suppose he hasn't had it on his person before, so that would beg the question where he got it from. And so there's the other part that that Sorweel thinks to himself. The problem with them thinking everybody's like children is that they won't take anyone seriously, which also made me think, okay, she knew about the Korai, but she ignored it because she didn't think it was important. So I'm a little confused about whether or not she noticed the Korai, and I don't think it matters either way. And for some reason, I've been picturing the Korai as little golden circlets, which apparently this one was a ball of iron. So that was interesting.
I think they're all iron.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure they're all like, they have like etchings into them, something like runes or something.
Okay.
But they all look like iron at least. I would need to look back at the scene to see, because that you would think she can, like, unless Yatwer is like hiding it from her.
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering, if she did.
Its presence,
yeah,
or its lack of presence, right? The whole, it feels like, right? I mean, everyone is allowed to hold on to their Korai, right? Like, are those regulated by the Imperial apparatus? I feel like the different generals and whoever, like the soldiers who have them, are allowed to keep them, but maybe I'm wrong about that.
I mean, that's probably true. That is what I thought. That's why she didn't say anything. But then Sorwheel is so self-congratulatory after that scene that he came within a few feet of her and he had the Korai and he got away with it. It was almost like he was happy to have gotten away with it, which I don't know if it's because she didn't say anything or if it's because he thought that she didn't notice it.
I kind of feel like she there was enough there to know that she knew that he had it, but I don't think she considers him a threat.
Okay, fair enough.
She doesn't really take him
makes
serious.
sense.
That's kind of the way I took it, but
yeah, that makes sense. That works.
Also, while we're still talking about this chapter, I was just reminded as I was flipping through the pages, I can't believe I forgot about this, and this wasn't the first thing I brought up. The non-men have flying cars. Insanity. I did not see that coming. I had to like take a step back when he described the flying chariot, because I was like, they have like what, like Pegasi? Like what's flying it? And then I was like, wait, there is no mount. Nothing is flying this chariot. This is just like I assumed all the sci-fi stuff was just with the console. I mean, that would have been super cool, but I wouldn't have been surprised if they had it. The non-men have flying cars too. Is that magic? I don't know, but that was awesome. That whole scene was awesome. Everything with the non-men there, that was so cool. Their interaction with Kellhus. What a bunch of creepy dudes. Oh, love it.
Yeah. Proyas called them a ghoul, and because of what happened at Kellhus, I thought he literally meant ghoul, but he's just calling them that because they're really old. Yeah, and there was one... What Kellhus said to the non-man also, I thought was really great. That I'm trying to find the line. But about how they stole their women. Oh, here we go. It's right here. You were cursed to go mad in the shadow of that memory, to live forever, dying their deaths, about the women and children that they lost. So, yeah. This was a very interesting exchange. I agree with you, Carl.
And then we had a mention of Nilgikus again, who I guess is hiding in the city, or something. Or maybe he's dead, I don't know.
Yeah.
I guess he's the last non-man king, is what we're led to believe. Is that, for some reason I thought it was a different one of them who was the last one, but I guess Nilgikus is the last one, and that's who we're dealing with here.
So that's not whose ashes the other guy Cleric has been passing up.
Supposedly, I mean, we don't have this confirmed, but Mimara thought it was Sinmara Sinjoy, who was the really big one who fought in the Huno Inkaroi wars, and I hope I'm remembering that name right, and like helped fight in the apocalypse too. But yeah, I go crazy for the non-men stuff. I love it. What about, okay, so we're hearing about the things you didn't like, Steve. How do you feel about the non-men?
Love the non-man.
Oh, thank God.
Love the non-man. I think they're so interesting. So creepy and like jaded and just tired of everyone's shit. You know, like they're just like, we've seen it all. But
they're really one of my favorite takes on the like long-lived race I've seen in fantasy. I'm really enjoyed. You know, it's not. I feel like it's almost a trope at this point that like the long-lived race is like full of extreme cynics, but like this is taking it to like a new extreme that it's like it's remarkable. It just makes every scene with them so tense because you're like, I don't know what they could do. Like they could just like crack and like kill someone. They're all potentially insane, and it's a great I just love the tension with them and how strange, and Baker does a great job of really evoking a sense of otherworldliness to them that I really feel like I haven't seen with these sort of like pseudo elf type races other than Tolkien himself. You know, with the elves and with kind of their ethereal nature. I you know, even the like when I think of other kind of equivalent versions of them, they all feel relatively more mundane and grounded, and I feel like the non-men just feel so otherworldly to me, which is interesting because they are apparently native to this world too, along with the humans.
I just imagine being alive for that long and seeing the things they've seen, been through the battles they've been through, and you're still here. It's just like, when does it end?
Yeah, I can't believe they haven't just like all killed themselves
Some
after
of
a
them
certain
did.
point. I mean, yeah, clearly. What keeps them going, I guess, is what is the question behind my question there. Like, what motivates them deep down?
Hate.
In their heart of hearts. Yeah.
Anger, disdain. I don't know. They're just so interesting to me. I love.
They're too angry to die.
Yeah.
They're just too pissed off. I fucking hate everyone and everything, and I'm let everyone know it.
Yeah, I like that. Too angry to die. Yeah, I think at first this take was a bit too cynical for me. Not the memory loss part, but the fact that they need to, the erratics basically, that they start to kill people when they love them because they need to feel something. But I think I'm coming around to it now. Still not a fan of the erratic nature of the non-men, but I think the memory loss thing is, I think, really, really deep there. Because for one thing, this is not a race that was built for immortality. They had it sort of shoved upon them. So, of course, their physiology doesn't accept the memories that they need for living, what is it now, thousands of years at this point. So, yeah, so I like that. What I would have liked to see, though, is a variety of reactions to the immortality. Not that they all behave this way because they've lived so long. But either way, I think as a take on the immortal elf, I do think it is very interesting.
You're definitely right that like they do feel a little bit. There's this term for the trope, planet of hats, and I think there's other kind of sub names for it, like nation of hats and like things of that, where it's like they all everyone who lives it's like based on like Star Trek, where the idea is like every alien on this planet they all wear the same type of hat. It's the idea that everyone's the same in this like whatever species, right? And I do feel like we really have like two types of non-men, which is like the sad, slightly crazy non-men, and then the erratics, who are just sadder and crazier, and maybe more powerful. I don't know if there's correlation there or not, or causation rather. Maybe it's just because the one we know is like insanely powerful, but and they even look. I mean, I think it adds to the otherworldliness for me that we as humans, at least as it's described, think they all look the same. But they see, when they look at each other, they don't see it all the same. It's like explicitly said, which I think is interesting and kind of speaks to, human flaws, and again, makes them feel kind of otherworldly and distinct in that way, even if it's, I think humans are maybe a little more adept at noticing differences than that. But I'm with you, Varsha, that I do wish maybe we saw a more diverse set of personalities. They do kind of all feel samey. I mean, that's even almost kind of the point of the scene with the three. It adds to the eeriness of them. Like, it's very kind of horror-esque, but it does make them feel less nuanced than they could be. So there's a little give or take there.
Yeah, I agree with you. You said something that I wanted to point back to, but I forgot. It's fine, it'll come back. But yeah, I am very curious to see more of them. And it feels like we're poised for a lot of terrible things to happen. Cleric feeding people his ashes and with a warning that he's going to kill them all, not just from the consult, but just the fact that he's an erratic Kuya mage and has recently declared that he loves them all. That I think is terrifying. And same with whatever's going on with Sorwheel, like you said, Carl, I don't think is going to end well for my opinion of him. So, so
I just feel like he's just like too good of a character to get away in this series without doing something horrible. Like even Akamian and Esmenet, who are like relatively moral characters in this series, do bad things.
Yeah.
You know, and it's not just like, oh, they're cruel to bad people. It's like they're cruel to like innocents. You know, as we can get to, that was a scene that was really hard for me to read with Esmenet and how she treated Neri. Is that her name?
Mm-hmm.
The prostitute. Yeah, that was rough.
Yeah. That are we ready to move on to that chapter then? That scene was rough, and I did wonder at the purpose of it. It feels like she could have been hidden anywhere, but it was in a whorehouse, and she's forced to confront her past and evaluate how far she's come from where she was, which I guess we've never seen her do, not in the first series. A little bit, I think, in some of her internal monologues in the third book, but not so much in this book or in this series. So I did, it felt almost like that whole scene, that the purpose of it was to make her confront or show us how she feels show us the difference from where she was to where she's got to be. And
the similarities,
yeah,
right? In the way she hasn't changed at all.
I
mean, she still has the you know, for a character who I think we hear about her heart, right? In particular in relation to her children, and like, you know, that there is this compassion she can feel, which I think is true and is one of her more admirable features. She also does have this callousness, this like, I'm a survivor, which she thinks about in this sequence, and it is just it's hard to read about. It's just really moving in a really upsetting way, seeing how she treats this girl. I mean, what is she's like 19, who she should perfectly be able to relate to, but she is so, I mean, like, in a way it's like she's threatening herself when she's threatening the girl, because it says everything about how she views herself and what she would do in that position, right? That she wouldn't, you know, her reaction is that she has to be cruel to a degree to make sure that this woman doesn't betray her. You know, that she feels so certain that this woman cannot be trusted because she feels like, you know, she wouldn't be trustworthy and is not trustworthy. And it's sad. It's just, I did not like her in that scene. And I felt very sad for her.
Yeah,
also,
sorry, go ahead.
I wonder if she just, you know, one of the things she talked about being so attracted to Akamian was his gentleness. That, like, he never hit her. He, you know, he wasn't abusive to her in the way that a lot of her customers were. And yet she is into this man. Right. Obviously, yes. I mean in a physical, like in that sense. Certainly, verbally, a Kamian can be cruel. But she's seemingly extremely attracted to this man. I mean, is it just physical with him? She in Hylas, I'm talking about, who has this. I mean, it makes sense. He's like a lead guard, but he has this extremely violent side where he just blew up on, you know, this woman that you would hope he would have some feelings for, you know, if not like, not love, but just like some affection is the right word, considering the relationship he has with her and how often he's gone to her, but he could so quickly, flip his... I mean, obviously people can hit people that they love, it's like people are complicated in that way, and abuse is complicated. But what I'm getting at is, like, Esmenet is seemingly attracted to this guy who, to my mind, represents a lot of the worst types of customers she had. But I don't know if it's because he's beholden to her and she knows he would never hurt her, or if it is that, like, sense of, like, being drawn to danger, which, humans can have, of, like, this kind of self-destructive, I'm attracted to someone who's bad for me thing. I don't know. That's also something that's very distressing to me, that I had just assumed, I guess, naively, that he was kind of gentle, at least with her, and maybe he is. I just would assume that that's the type of person she would go for, considering she was missing a Camian, and that's kind of one of the things she was attracted to with the Camian. But Emhylas is like a bastard. He really just, like, went off and would have murdered this girl in cold blood.
Yeah. I think that scene was jarring because first we have Esmenet seeing herself in that girl, and she comes to the conclusion that she must be keeping her a secret because she must be in love with Emhylas, which in a sense equated him to me to Akamian a little bit. So it was really jarring to see him walk in and start beating her up. But to your point about Esmenet being attracted to him, I doubt that she would have seen him like this until now. And I don't know if it's clear that she continued to be attracted to him after that. At this point in the story, I think everybody is using everybody else, except Emhylas, I think, is in love with Esmenet, and or at least worships her, and so he wants to help her out. But Esmenet's using Emhylas is using the girl, and the girl is, I think, Emhylas, and there's an interesting triangle of affection, like misguided affection going on here too. So yeah, I'd be very surprised if Esmenet is attracted to him after this, but until now I think she was mostly, what's the word I'm looking for? I think enjoying the attention she had from him. And I think she only recently realized that he's in love with her, and it's not apparent that she returns his affections. She's still mostly just using him.
No, definitely, yeah, she's not that into him. I mean, I guess what you said that kind of not ring true, that's not the right saying, but what stood out to me and that, like, kind of spoke to what I was getting at and struggling with was, like, I just feel like she would have noticed if this guy was, like, dangerous in that way, not just as a guard. And again, it makes sense because he is, in a sense, a man of violence. But I guess not. I mean, maybe he...
So...
Or if she did, or even, like, just subconsciously... Because she seems to be good at reading people generally, right? Like, Kellhus seems to be the exception. And even then, she now knows what Kellhus is like since Akamian told her the truth. I say now. It was, like, 30 years ago in story. But, like, that's always been one of her strengths, was being able to, like, kind of read... Well, but she fell for the consult skin spies, so I don't know. Maybe I'm taking her at her... Because she certainly thinks she's good at reading people.
Yeah.
And so maybe that's the problem, is I fell for her bullshit.
So here's the thing, though. I think there are behaviors that make people unhappy without them necessarily thinking that it's wrong and that they wouldn't associate themselves with people who indulge in said behaviors, if that makes sense. Like, yeah, I could get into a whole discussion about the perpetuation of the cycle of trauma, but ultimately the problem, it's not strictly necessary that she thinks she could be hurt by it, but she doesn't necessarily think that it's wrong. She might think that this is, or even if she does, she might resign herself to this is how it is. This is how men behave in this world.
Right.
And so he's just an average man, so it's not necessarily something she might use as a parameter to judge and decide who she may or may not want to be with. So I think at this point, I don't know enough about Esmenet and what she believes in to say whether or not knowing this about him would have changed how she felt about him.
Yeah, and I want to be clear that, like, this isn't a criticism, what I'm saying. It's a question of, like, I guess what you're saying there is exactly what I'm getting at is, like, I don't understand their relationship enough fully, I guess. Like, I mean, it's vague enough. Like, it's fine to be kept kind of ambiguous. Like, that's a perfectly valid choice. And, like, it's ultimately not that important to the story, I don't think. I mean, we'll see. I guess we have 2 more books. But I suspect it's not going to be, like, you know, the key point around, it's not like her relationship with her children, I guess is what I'm getting at, or Kellhus or Camion, right? And I'm just curious about how she really, she talks about how she views him, but, like, I never got this, like, was she surprised? Like, certainly she was shocked because it kind of happened suddenly, but was she like, oh yeah, that's just what men do? Or was it, you know, with him, I guess, you know, what was her perspective on him doing this thing? I'm curious, because we didn't get that in the scene, right? Like, it just kind of, it was more about, she was thinking about herself in that moment, which I think is a very human thing, in a sense, where she's judging herself and being like, why am I reacting so slowly, you know? And then, you know, and then she proceeds to be cruel. She stops him from killing her, which is, you know, that's something, that's not nothing, but... So anyway, that's my rambling thoughts.
So the reason I said that was because she had no follow-up thoughts about what a terrible thing he was about to do. She didn't spend any bandwidth on it. She just moved on past the fact that he beat up the girl, which makes me think that on some level, if she's not necessarily okay with it, but that she's accepted that this is the way of the world. And And so she's not dwelling on it too much. She has no, she passes absolutely no judgment on Kellhus at this point. She does not even flinch from him, which I think the lack of interiority there is telling, that like it's giving us a lot of information about what she makes of the situation.
I agree. What are your thoughts on this scene, Steve? Oh, you were getting...
Oh, there you go. I think even Akamian, who I think we can all agree probably cares for Esmenet more than anyone else does, in his own twisted way, he's not exactly been the nicest person. I mean, I think everyone has... I can't think of anyone who's really been thoughtful and caring to Esmenet without wanting something in return. And I think in this scene... the way I kind of took it was that with all these other things going on, she fell back into what felt comfortable and what she was used to before, almost as a coping mechanism or a way to kind of escape and just go back to what her a lifetime ago probably seems like now. But that's kind of the way I took it, is she's wanting to kind of fall back into old habits, because that's what feels comfortable in a really twisted way.
So being accepting of the cruelty in the world, without questioning it too much. Yeah, that makes sense.
I mean, I remember in the first trilogy her thinking about how normal it was for her to be, like, beaten and raped, you know? Which is that's a very real thing that sex workers deal with. Particularly, you know, poorer, less regulated, you know, sorts. It's sad, and I mean, it makes sense that she would have kind of just grown to just view it like that's just how it is, and that's just how men are, you know.
Yeah. Yep.
You make a great point too, Steve, that, like, every relationship in her life has been transactional. Like, even Akamian did not, like, I guess he in some sense loved her unconditionally, because he still loves her, he's still carrying a torch for her. But he did not live out that love unconditionally. Like, there was never a moment where he wasn't really, like, constantly, you know... I mean, I guess it kind of, in the Thousandfold Thought, in the beginning, before he finds out about Kellhus, he kind of just, like, went along for the ride. But their relationship definitely was pretty transactional, all things considered.
The other reason why the scene was difficult was I've never been a fan of I'll burn the world to save my loved ones. And I don't agree that there's a justification for that. And watching, and I suppose it makes sense that Esmenet would be someone who would, given all she's been through, given how little affection she's had, she would try very hard to protect what she has. But yeah, it reduces her significantly in my eyes. So we'll see where this goes.
I agree with that, and I think it's a very intentional choice on Baker's part. I think these stories in general, the second apocalypse, it is almost kind of trying to show the dark side of a lot of things that are shown traditionally very in a positive light. Whether that's like warriors, kind of traditional heroes, leaders, gods now, right? And all of these things, obviously, I think we have seen in different stories kind of subverted and criticized and things like that, But in this case, I think what he's doing is trying to kind of explore the dark side of motherhood. And we're seeing that with Yatwer as well, right? Like, it is very intentional that Yatwer is a fucking scary goddess. And she represents mothers, she represents children, she represents beggars. The people that we so often associate as being victims or as being, timid or needing protection, right? Or some way just like martyrs, right? As something kind of good, right? In some like false alignment scale, right? It's just kind of like inherently, and we're seeing that with children too, right? Where obviously Kelmomas is this just like pure evil child, and I think we're kind of he's trying to very, through Esmenet and through Yatwer and through kind of a lot of these storylines, we're seeing the dark side potentially to motherhood and the ways that like this drive could lead someone to being cruel and disregarding other people, other women in this case, or children even. Again, this girl really was like little more, she's 19, right? And like she's been abused since she was a child, like a true little child, and yet Esmenet is willing to just terrorize her essentially in the pursuit of saving her children. And I what's extra sad about it to me is I feel like that's not even the most effective way to help this girl. Like there would be ways to manipulate her with kindness or something, but instead she goes straight for, I'll fucking murder you and destroy your life, so you better not betray me.
In fact, I did wonder if that would make her straight run to someone and seek protection, betray her and seek protection.
Right. Exactly. You would think it would motivate her to betray her, just to be like, I get it, fear works, it's certainly, there are times where like you threaten someone and they play along, but using the royal you here, obviously, I try not to threaten people in real life and see if it works out for me. But yeah, it's just, it could absolutely backfire. And maybe that's what we'll see, right? Maybe Baker will like make a big point of it, that like this girl ends up betraying them. And, why wouldn't she? With how Esmenet is being portrayed by Maithanet, and also how she's acting now to this poor young woman.
And she precipitated the whole thing by making him see, I forget his name now, the boy, her other son, Indrilatas, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The one who just died?
Mm-hmm, the one who just died. So I'm assuming that's what caused this hostile takeover of the city, and
Oh, for sure.
yeah. But yeah, that's another angle that's very interesting with the whole assassin, and Imhalis claiming that there's no turning back now, that she's hired the assassin, that she is going to win this thing. I think that's how I interpreted that last exchange they had, that she's not likely to lose this because she's got that assassin working for her. So
that was the gift of Yatwer, right?
Yeah. Sorry, I was only half listening when I said I was listening in earlier. But did you guys talk about how Sorweel had the Italics POV when he picked up the Korai from Yatwer? And
no, that did not. We didn't. No.
So yeah, so we saw him speaking, and by gift of Yatwer you mean the White Luck Warrior.
Yes.
Right? So, yeah, that was interesting. I think I'm starting to think that the theory where he's moving through a lot of people is making a lot of sense, because the Italics must mean that it's the White Luck Warrior we're seeing the perspective of, but he's looking at Sorweel and Prosperian, whereas and now he's back in Momen and dealing with the assassin and the person who's looking at the assassin. So, yeah, that I don't know if he is the gift of Yatwer, but he did interact with said gift at some point.
Sorweel.
Sorry, we started this. I started this with you asking if the assassin is the gift of Yatwer.
Yes.
But
because he killed the assassin. The gift of Yatwer killed the other assassin, and my reading of it was he took the assassin's place.
Oh, is that what happened? Interesting. I thought they just had an interaction and then he moved on. But I must have missed that.
So it's written very in a confusing way.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was kind of reading into it, but like my reading of it, because he talks about like the blood on his hands and things, and I guess that could have theoretically been Kellhus or something, but like I would have thought it would have been, just with the context, with the way it was written, my thought was that he's talking to this guy and he's reliving it and living it present. You know, he's living it in like multiple timelines, or not timelines, but multiple times. And it ends with him killing this guy to become the assassin who I guess kills Meandering. I don't know who was hired. I mean, it's not made explicit, but the way the assassin talks is not how I would expect. Like, Esmenet even thinks about it. It's like not how she expected one of the, what is it, the Narendari?
Yeah.
So that, how they would talk, and like how they talk about Ajokli, and
yeah, he says the mother, I take what the mother gives or something, echoing what Sorweel was told.
Right, exactly. He talks about Yatwer as opposed to Ajokli.
Yeah.
Which, again, so that was how I read it, but I wasn't certain, because I do feel like it's left kind of ambiguous. Which, speaking of Ajokli as well, sorry, we can, I'm just talking about all these god identities. Did this chapter confirm that Ajokli is in Kelmomas? Or at least Kelmomas thinks Ajokli is inside him?
Yeah. Pretty sure, yeah. There is literally a line here that says the four-horned god is... Oh, come on, I just saw it.
Four-horned brother.
Yeah, four-horned brother. And yeah, he seems certain that Ajokli is not wanting to kill his mother. He's not anxious that all of this will lead to the death of his mother. Which is also interesting because the coup happened exactly when Esmenet was out. Which must... I guess that's also part of the plan. That Ajokli or Yatwer or whoever set into motion so that she doesn't get in trouble when the coup happens. He was the god here, the four-horned brother. Yeah, that's Ajokli.
I do feel like Maythanet doesn't actually want her harmed too. Sidebar on that. Like, I feel like he is smart enough to know that that's probably a bad idea. He just wants to get her under his control at this point.
He's trying to delegitimize her, calling her mad, right? Yeah. We take such gifts as she gives. That's what the assassin said. So, the blood on his hand, the line about it was after saying that the Whitelock warrior saw himself standing upon a distant hill looking forward. So I thought that was for whatever killing he would do when he's standing upon said hill. I didn't think he killed the assassin, but yeah, I guess that's an interesting theory too, because this assassin was talking about how he gutted a dove in the old way. He seemed a little unsure of himself and a little confused, if I may, and the other guy seemed so sure of himself, the one that Esmenet meets. So they did feel like different people. So yeah, I like that theory that he may have been replaced. But also, what was up with the italics that we saw with Sorweel?
Oh, no, here it is. He definitely killed the guy. He looked forward, saw himself rolling the long-haired man, the man he was talking to, threw his blood into the black slot beneath the bed rack.
Oh.
He literally hid the body. So he definitely, I think, killed the guy, which would then make... Yeah, I knew there was something more that led me to believe that. I mean, I guess it's not made explicit that he killed the guy, but he definitely hid the body.
Interesting.
And
tomorrow's
I wish we got more of a
haunts.
description. Sorry, what's that?
And he heard tomorrow's prayer haunts yaw deep across the homestead. So whatever it is going to happen the next day, which we haven't encountered yet.
Oh, yeah, interesting. We'll say it is very satisfying to have the Ajokli and Kelmomas theory confirmed. Feels good to guess that one right. Assuming that it is correct and it's not just Kelmomas. I don't know why he would think that if it wasn't true. Like, that just feels like a random thing to suddenly think without any provocation. But I guess we'll see.
Steve's smiling mysteriously.
I don't know anything.
Of course you don't. It's not like you've read the series before and know all the answers that we don't have.
It's all a mystery.
For a different series we are reading, I asked Chibipo for Wars of Light and Shadow because I hate it when characters die in that series. Like, please give me a list so I don't get attached to them. In this series, I'm like, I don't care. Or rather, I am expecting that everybody will die. So maybe give me a list of everyone who will survive.
Yeah, right? Who can I get attached to? And do I want to get attached to them?
Exactly.
Give me a list of their war crimes in advance, and we'll see if I'm willing to cross the line for them.
Yeah. I'm afraid to like this person. Please tell me if it's okay, and if I won't think myself a terrible person 2 chapters later for liking them.
Oh, yeah. So, but is Kelmomas a reliable narrator?
Definitely not. He clearly is not a reliable narrator, and that's what makes me uncertain if Ajokli is actually possessing him, part of him, something or another. What I'm unclear on is why he would think it otherwise, though. Like, that came out of nowhere to me, that he suddenly was thinking, like, he didn't know he thought the voice was Sammy the longest time. Is this separate from the voice? Like, I don't know.
So if it
I
is
don't think he's reliable,
Ajokli, then when Sammy died, the voice said, "Why did you take so long to kill me?" Which is why I dug my heels and I was like, no, this is Sammy. What did that line mean then if it is Ajokli?
Well, he can lie. I mean, he could make it Sammy, or he could make Kelmomas think it's Sammy talking to him.
He is the trickster,
which is what I
right?
assumed was happening. Yeah. That actually, if anything, added to my thought that it was Ajokli, is that Ajokli would lie. He's the trickster god. So...
But Kelmomas is also half Dunyain, so...
He would have figured it out.
I don't know what that means in this context. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how to take that.
His mind might be playing tricks on him. It could be
interesting.
It could be his how would you say, like his conscious or his like his inner voice, or I don't know, how would you say it? It's late.
Madness, like
conscience, his conscience. Maybe playing tricks on him.
Interesting. A fucked up conscience. That's an interesting idea. If that he think it hears it as Sammy, who I guess would presumably sound like him.
And we've been told that he's been listening to this voice for a very long time, right? Pretty much from when he was young, and that's why he's been afraid of his father and uncle and brothers. But yeah, I would very much like to understand that voice in his head when Sammy died.
You know, I obviously Kellhus has been an absent father, but you would think that Kellhus would warn Esmenet. Like, he would be around enough to realize what was wrong with Kelmomas, because that could prove a problem, as it clearly has. And so Kellhus, being Kellhus, I would feel like would warn people, if not Esmenet, although I would assume Esmenet, but like certainly Maithanet, other people. The fact that he hasn't, or did not, makes me wonder if, I mean, either did this voice manifest later on so that he never noticed it, or is it hidden and all this shit is hidden, just like Sorweel's stuff is hidden by Yatwer, so that he can't be read.
But Enrilathus figured it out immediately, right? And
oh, you're right. So you can. So
yeah.
Why didn't Kellhus do anything about it? Like that to me, I feel like did he look at his kid and be like, he's just a little sociopath. It's okay. Like, was he not concerned? He's like, oh, my kid hates me. No problem. Like,
I don't think he cares. Like, it didn't seem like he gave a shit about the fact that Sammy died. So
yeah, I guess he's like, the kid's too young to fight in the great ordeal. I don't have to worry about it. You know, that's all that matters. You know, maybe he just doesn't. Yeah, he just doesn't give a shit. He's like, I'm going out here. You know, we're gonna go fight the apocalypse, and you know, that's it. Game over.
Gotta go. Need to have some existential conversations with Proyas. Bye.
Yeah. I mean, that continues to add to the idea, though, that like, does he know he's gonna die? You know, like if he's been in the outside, has he seen the future? Does he know he's marching to his death?
What is the outside?
That is a very good question. I don't know.
The space between gods, what is that? The non-man said that that's what they worship, which, again... Yeah.
The void. Yeah.
The void, the space between gods. Is it... So, Steve, you were talking earlier about how... I don't remember if you used the word confusing, but there is a lot of all the gods. I don't really understand how the world works with all the gods and what the non-men say about the space between the gods, and why is damnation one thing? I think that's my big question, because there are so many gods and shouldn't it be damnation per each god's perspective? So like one god's damnation is another god's salvation, whatever. You end up in or if you end up in the heaven of one god, that's essentially hell for a different god. That's how I would imagine it, but it doesn't seem to be the case. It feels like damnation is a universal, like global thing that happens regardless of which god you might be worshipping or who might be favoring you. So yeah, I'm still trying to wrap my head around all of that, and I hope we get some answers, but it is making some of it a little confusing for me to read, like trying to understand the interactions. I feel like there may be more profound than I am making of them. Because, no, you don't think so?
No. No, the series mentions damnation a lot. But what is damnation, and is that even a thing, or is it just something they believe? And like you mentioned, whose damnation is it? Is it what God you're worshiping? Is it, yeah? So
Yeah.
maybe we'll find
I mean, damnation on some level has to exist. Like, not prescribing a moral judgment to it, but the idea that like something happens to sorcerers and presumably other people after they die that is different than what can happen to other people, right? Like, I mean, unless the idea of the judging eye is just bullshit and all Mimara is seeing is bullshit, which I guess is possible. But I just feel like with the way the series has functioned narratively, that we're not leading to the reveal that Mimara has been imagining everything, right? In the same way that it turned out the gods were real the entire time. But are they actually tortured for eternity in sort of the like Christian idea of hell? Or is it like, that's something I'm unclear on. And, I think intentionally so, right? Like, well, yeah, what is damnation? What does it actually look like? What does it mean? Why does it happen? Do the gods control it? Like, I'm not convinced that the gods actually control where people go after they die. I think they may just be bullshitting, and that they're just like, fourth dimensional entities that exist beyond human and non-min comprehension.
Was it Prosperian? I feel like there was one conversation there about someone telling another person that you should hope that Yatwer favors you so that you go to her domain in the afterlife.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which, again, if that's true, then what does damnation mean? Is that person now damned according to all of the other gods, or are they... Or if you're favored by any god, you're not damned. If you're favored by Ajokli, then how can that not be a damnation?
I'm okay with it being left ambiguous in terms of like how it literally functions, but I wish we got a little more description. Like, I remember us talking about this and critiquing this in the original trilogy of like, is there heaven? Is there hell? Like, what do they believe? I wish we got some more description of like, what is it that the Enrithi believe? What is it that the Fanim believe? What are, not about the gods, which I feel like we kind of understand, and I think I've understood from like fairly early on, but about the afterlife. What do they think? And the outside, what do they think it actually is? Because when you think about a lot of like, real world religions, like, there are arguments about it, but there are also like pretty clearly laid out, like, this is how it works, right? And similarly, when you go back to like ancient, even the oldest religions in the world, like, I'm sure different sects argue about it, right? But like they're within individual belief systems, there's a system to how the afterlife works, and I wish we had a better idea of, beyond just innuendos and like, illusions, like you were referencing there, Varsha, like exactly what they believe happened. Like, do you go to a specific heaven based on a god you worship? Are there multiple hells? Is it one hell for everyone and multiple heavens? Is it, what do they believe? Because I feel like that would help this conversation and kind of understand where the characters are coming from.
Yeah, exactly. I think I don't mind it being ambiguous too, like you said, but it's just that some of the relationships and some of the godly interventions, I think, are less impactful to me than they might have been if I understood more about how the world works.
That's fair. I think in a way the not knowing adds to the kind of the chaos of this world because we don't know. I'm not sure if those are...
It adds to the tension,
Yeah.
definitely, of like what is real, what isn't, what's what's actually coming for these characters.
I suppose that makes sense. I think what I would have liked, and not necessarily a criticism, but I think something that would just enhance things for me a little bit, is if obviously everybody in this world doesn't know all the metaphysics. I think the sorcerers are the ones who seem most well informed, and the others just believe whatever they believe, like, keywords around damnation and some gods they worship. They probably have some rituals and so on. I would like to have at least as much information as like one person who belongs to the world, like as a non-sorcerer who belongs to this world, which I don't think we have at this point.
Exactly. Exactly.
So if I had that, then I could think through what the relationships between the gods mean, like some of the mythology, and what it means that Yatwer is intervening and that some person of Ajokli's is working for Yatwer, which I only know to be surprised because Esmenet herself is surprised. Like, there was no setup preceding that to tell us that these two gods have nothing to do with each other, and so it's surprising that a devotee of Ajokli is saying something that a devotee of Yatwer might. And I don't even know if devotee is the right word to use in the context of these gods, right? So that's what I'd like to know. Like, one person, I'd like to know as much as a person belonging to the world, but that's fine. Like, I do like figuring it out as I go, but I do think knowing a bit more. I don't often complain that I wish I had more information, but I think in this case I do a little bit.
Right. For me, it's like, it's not the ambiguity of how everything actually works. I don't mind never finding out.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same thing in A Song of Ice and Fire. Like, I don't mind never knowing if, any of the gods are actually real or not. I just want to know what the characters believe about the gods.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
I want to understand how their belief system works, so I have a better idea of, like, their relationships and what all of these things happening, how we're supposed to interpret them. And that's, particularly in relation to the afterlife. And I think you're right too, Varsha, also in terms of like how the gods relate to one another and like what their relationships are. I guess Ajokli's an outsider. We have gotten that he is in some way, he's like Loki, like a lot of trickster gods. That, he sort of, he doesn't fit in with the rest of them. But, okay, which leads me to a question I've had, and pardon me if I've asked this before. The White Luck Warrior is not a god we've been given a name for, correct? Like, it's not Gilgail, right? Or anything like it's just called the White Luck Warrior. Or if it has a name, we haven't heard it yet.
Yeah.
He is supposed to be the brother of Yatwer, right? And weren't we told at some point that Gilgail is the brother?
I think there are a bunch of siblings, though.
Okay.
Like other pantheons, but I'm not positive. I do feel like, and Gilgail's the war god and the White Luck Warrior, and so that's where I was like a little confused about, but I suspected they weren't the same, but I just wasn't sure,
I could be remembering this completely wrong, but I feel like at some point in the Judging Eye we were told that he is a manifestation of the god of war. But I'm not sure.
Are there multiple gods of war? I mean, that wouldn't be unusual for a pantheon, but those different war gods stand for different aspects of war too. When you think of like in Greek mythology, like Ares and Athena are both gods of war, but they're like different aspects of war. Mm-hmm. And so I wish we had a better understanding of what the relationships are like, what kind of the gods signify.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I seem to recall that, but I could have made it up completely.
We're given a lot of info.
Yeah.
That sounds, I don't know if you're like, what is it, the Streisand effect? But I remember that happening too. And I don't know if this is just the Streisand effect of you said that, and so now I'm like, we did read that, but that sounds like something we read.
Yeah. Yeah. It like when before he was even introduced, I thought we were told that, but again, probably making it up. We'll see. I'm sure if it's important, we'll get confirmation of it again.
It is interesting, I think, conceptually, that like we have been given what the white luck is as a concept, right? Of like the strain of luck, of like the series of events that lead to something happening, right? It's not fate. It's like I I don't even actually really know how to describe it differently than, you know, what's the difference between luck and fate, right? But that is tied to a war god or a warrior, you know. It's an interesting connection there, and I haven't really thought about it, of like what Baker may be getting at with that. If like, you know, that has to be intentional, that like this god of luck is also like a warrior.
And I didn't think of it until just now when you put it like that, but the fact that the word luck is used to why can't I frame the sentence? The fact that the word luck is used to make for a concept that means that everything is preordained, which
right
is interesting too.
Yeah, I'm again, now that we're like saying this out loud, I'm wondering the difference, like, because there's a goddess of fate, right, who they continuously refer to as the whore, which I love the quote we got in the here I can pull that up, because that's going to be one of my quotes
epigraph,
for the
week. Right? That you don't know the future, so you call it a whore.
Yeah, no two prophets agree, so to spare our prophets their feelings, we call the future a whore.
Yep.
I love that. I think that's great. It's great for this universe. It totally, you know, makes sense, right? I love just everything it's saying there about prophets and fate, and you know, and also, you know, I think it speaks to views of women too, and sexuality there, and I just love that as an epigraph. But what's the difference, right, between, are they related within this universe at all? I mean, how do the gods even function, right? Like, are they actually, is it humans projecting their own understandings of the world onto these fourth dimensional beings, or do these beings actually in some way literally like are manifestations of these things, right? Like Yatwer seems to be acting through the things she's the goddess of, similar like the White Luck Warrior is, but like how does all that work? And yeah, where does fate come into this? And is fate one of the gods like playing this Game of Thrones, right? You know, like is fate involved here? Something that just occurred to me. Does she have an avatar that we, you know, haven't seen yet, or I mean have seen probably, but like that we don't know, you know, is representing her on the mortal plane?
Esmenet?
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. I don't know.
Yeah, that would be too literal a manifestation.
But maybe not.
But
maybe not, because it's there. Those parallels aren't drawn specifically, and so it would be one of those things where it's like, oh, in hindsight, you're like, oh, she was. Of course, it's the whore, right? Like that makes sense. I don't know what that would mean for the story. Just like going with this theory, like how that would play out. You know, what Esmenet would do that would make that. I guess it would add to the idea of like this nobody rising up and becoming a somebody, but I don't know, like in a plot sense, like what the end game would be for that.
Yeah, I think the thing about that epigraph also, it's basically to spare the feelings of the prophet whose future didn't come true, right? So fate is
Right.
what the future is a whore, so like I don't know, she did what she wanted to do, and I don't know. So is that to say that Esmenet, whatever future she creates, is the one that nobody wanted, and she
Or couldn't
brought
predict.
something about that wasn't on the cards from any other god.
That would be
Steve's
interesting if
really
she's
stopping
sort of the
himself from
wild
saying
card.
something.
Yeah. I don't know. This is interesting. An interesting train of thought here. I'm sad Dan isn't here to throw us off the trail.
Dan is very
throw
good.
questions at us.
Very good at that.
He asks questions, and like sometimes it's like he's basically telling us the answer to our face and we only figure it out later, and sometimes he's just blatantly lying to our face and just completely bullshitting us. It's a delight never knowing what I'm getting with him.
It's entertaining. Yeah, it's fun. I'm not. Dan is a master at doing that.
Mm-hmm.
He's got those Dunyain skills.
He does.
This is where he learned it all.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
You read the series enough times and you just become Kellhus.
It's like a instruction book.
that's what the appendix, the 200-page appendix at the end of the fourth book is. So are we ready to do quotes? Were there any other topics
Yeah, let's
we
do
should
it.
speak about?
I think we got everything that I wanted to talk about. I don't know if anything else stood out to y'all.
Yeah, same. Steve, was there anything you wanted to chat about that we didn't get to?
No, I think we're pretty good.
Cool.
One of my favorite ones was the beginning of chapter 10. Men are forever counting their losses, hoarding them. There is meaning to be found in victimization, and no small justification. To be wronged is to be owned, to walk among the debtors wherever you go.
Mm.
Nice.
Yeah, that is a good one. Oh, I do love the first epigraph in chapter 11. This one thing every tyrant will tell you: nothing saves more lives than murder.
Mm.
I love that quote.
That's a good one.
Love it. And it comes from a book called The Virtue of Sin. Great title. Great. That could be the title of an epic fantasy story.
Yeah.
That's great. It definitely makes me think of Tywin Lannister's quote. You know what? I'm gonna be paraphrasing here. I can't remember exactly, but you know he's like challenging Tyrion, who's like talking shit about the Red Wedding. And I won't say spoilers for anyone who hasn't read it, but like he's, you know, what's the difference between murdering, you know, people at a wedding, we'll say, and, you know, as opposed to like on a battlefield, or, you know, I just I love the idea. It's like, yeah, you know, they're talking about tyrants and how they're like such an easy excuse to be like, oh yeah, I'm saving lives by murdering people. It's actually moral what I'm doing.
Mm. Yeah. I like this one. Oh man. Oh yeah. And this was after Sorweel finishes talking to Caiutus, apparently. And for the first time he felt it, the impunity of standing unseen.
Mm.
Yeah, I don't know, I highlighted a lot in this section, but mostly I feel like it doesn't make sense out of context, but it was very impactful as I was reading. Yeah. Oh, here's a good one. The pain dwells in the balance of loss and retention, in losing and knowing what was lost, in being two incommensurate people, one with a father and mother and one without. One with pride and honor and one without. This is at the beginning of chapter 10. And that was Sorweel, by the way. Thinking about the shadows of missing things and how they are always cold. You did the one about victimization. I had that too. But yeah, Carl, do you have any?
I do love, I I mean, going back to what we began with, I think it's what we began with, Proyas and Kellhus' conversation, how it ends in chapter 10, choice, his Lord and God said, smiling, willing, your shackles are cast from this very iron.
Mm.
And it speaks to, that one sentence really it just describes exactly how Kellhus plays people, right?
Mm-hmm.
By making them willing to do what he wants, you know. It's that's the venom. What makes what he does so atrocious, right? Is everyone he manipulates. They do it, you know. They end up doing it all willingly. Great quote.
Yep, I agree.
It's exciting.
Yep, lots to come. I'm excited for the end of this book. And it seems like we may have one more Shrang battle coming up with all the hordes and stuff, but and I'm eager to get back to Akamian. We only did 2 chapters, so we didn't get an Akamian chapter this time. But
agreed. His and Mimara storyline is probably the one I'm most invested in at this point. Although Esmenet too, I want her. There's just not as many crazy. I don't know what it is. I think I am more invested in Akamian and Mimara. Although Esmenet did have the best. I mean, she wasn't even in it, but again, my favorite scene of this book so far, with Enrilitas and Kelmomas and Mathan, and that was so good. I'm still reeling from it.
yeah, I think as chapters go, the chapter 10 was maybe among my favorites so far. I don't know if it's the favorite, but it is among my favorites because of the focus on Sorweel and how things changed for him. I think I mentioned this before, I have been wanting to see him go from that, not weakling is the wrong word, but someone who thinks so little of himself to someone who does stuff. And that happened almost drastically, and so to see the aftermath and who he is in that, I think this chapter was fantastic for that.
Right, he goes from a passive player here to a more active player.
Yeah.
You know, he's very agentic. It's a word I learned recently. He has agency.
Interesting.
And acts on it.
Like that.
Yes.
Cool. All right then, so for everybody listening, we will be talking chapters 12 and 13 next week. Thank you so much. We will see you soon. Bye.